Hey friends, dive into a thrilling story full of mystery and betrayal. What's behind the disappearance of a fortune? Is it a friend, a lover, or family? Listen till the end to uncover the shocking truth. Part 1. The Start of Trouble and First. Suspicions. New York City, the city that never sleeps, pulsed with life. Skyscrapers gleamed under the autumn sun. Taxis honked at intersections, and the air carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee from street vendors and the faint tang of hot asphalt. In this bustling metropolis, where everyone chased their dreams, lived a 20-year-old student named Steve. He had the look of a typical American college kid, medium height, with tousled chestnut hair that constantly fell over his eyes, and a lanky frame that betrayed his indifference to the gym. Steve wore faded jeans, t-shirts emblazoned with logos of rock bands like Nirvana or The Strokes, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days from late-night walks through Brooklyn. His face, with expressive green eyes and a hint of stubble, often showed a mix of exhaustion and rebellion. Steve's personality was impulsive, much like the rhythm of New York itself. He'd dive headfirst into ideas, dreams of becoming a writer or launching a startup, but quickly lost steam when things got tough. Lately, life seemed to test him relentlessly. Exams at New York University, NYU, in math and literature had gone disastrously, leaving his semester incomplete and threatening expulsion. This promised yet another fight at home, where his parents expected him to be the family's pride. Home was a spacious but cold apartment in Brooklyn, its minimalist design amplifying the tension that hung in the air. Steve's stepfather, Richard, a stern businessman in his 50s, had close-cropped gray hair, piercing gray eyes, and a muscular build honed by regular gym sessions. Always dressed in crisp Brooks Brothers suits, Richard spoke in short, sharp sentences and despised disorder. He ran a real estate company, earning enough to provide for the family, but his authoritarian demeanor made living with him unbearable. He often criticized Steve for his laziness, calling him an irresponsible dreamer, words that cut deep. Steve's mother, Emily, was the opposite, a gentle woman in her 40s with long blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail and warm blue eyes that hid exhaustion. She worked as an accountant at Richard's firm, trying to mediate between her son and husband, but her disagreements with Steve piled up. He dismissed her advice as outdated. Emily loved cooking, and the smell of her signature pancakes often filled the apartment, but even that couldn't ease the strain. Problems rained down on Steve like autumn leaves in Central Park, where he often wandered to escape reality. Steve's only escape was the wild parties with his friends, where he could forget the chaos of his life. These gatherings happened either at their apartment or in the loud clubs of Manhattan, filled with thumping music, flashing strobe lights, and the smell of beer, perfume, and sweat. The crowds danced to techno and indie rock, and for a few hours, Steve felt free. His friends, fellow NYU students, were his lifeline, carefree, fun-loving, and always up for adventure. Among them stood out Mike, Steve's best friend. Tall and athletic, with short blonde hair and a charismatic grin, Mike was the life of the party. He wore denim jackets, sported a dragon tattoo on his forearm, a nod to his rebellious streak, and organized every gathering. But Steve noticed Mike's occasional envious glances at his new gadgets or mentions of being broke, which made him question his friend's sincerity. One rainy morning, as New York lay under a blanket of gray clouds and the apartment reeked of leftover pizza from last night's party, Steve woke with a pounding headache and a sense of dread. Checking the closet in Richard's study, where important documents and valuables were kept, he discovered a shocking loss. Nearly $100,000 had vanished. The money, from the sale of a Hamptons vacation home, was meant for Richard to invest in competitor stocks. Steve rifled through the closet, his heart racing, but the cash was gone. Panic gripped him. If Richard found out, a storm would erupt, possibly even accusations of theft. Instead of calling the police, where his party lifestyle might make him a suspect, Steve decided to seek advice from Madame Clara, a psychic living in the Yonkers suburbs. Clara, a slender woman in her 50s, had neatly pinned hair streaked with silver and always wore a crisp white linen blouse, giving her an air of elegance. Her house, surrounded by a garden of blooming roses, smelled of lavender and candles, creating a mystical atmosphere. Her clear gray eyes seemed to peer through a person's soul. Steve took the subway to Yonkers, the hum of the train and chatter of passengers filling his ears. At Clara's, he sat at a wooden table covered with an embroidered cloth and began to speak, his voice trembling. "I live with my mom and stepdad, and he's strict," Steve said, clenching his fists. "Someone stole his money from the apartment, almost $100,000. I suspect my friends from the party. Can you tell me who did it?" Clara, seated in a chair, took his hand in her warm palms, her gaze steady. "Many people have been close to you lately," she said softly, her voice like a whisper of wind. "One of them took the money, but don't look for it. It'll only make things worse. Your family is strained, and it could get uglier. You have a habit of leaving a knife on the table blade up. It's a bad omen that draws conflict." Steve shook his head, his brows furrowing. He couldn't see how his childhood habit of leaving a kitchen knife carelessly after breakfast tied to the theft. "What's the knife got to do with it? If you can't help find the money, just say so," he snapped, standing up, his face flushed. The air in the house grew heavy, the scent of incense mingling with his frustration. Clara only smiled, saying nothing more, leaving Steve with a sense of hopelessness. Back in Brooklyn, Steve sat on the couch amid the remnants of the party, empty. Bottles, chip crumbs, and decided to find the thief himself. Opening his phone's gallery, he scrolled through party photos. Loud music, laughter, dancing, the smell of pizza and beer, it had all seemed carefree. Now, every guest looked suspicious. Some stood too close to the closet, others averted their eyes. Friends he called urged him to calm down. "Stop stressing yourself out. You can't find a thief without proof," they said, their voices tinged with annoyance. But Steve couldn't stop, his mind consumed by suspicion. "What am I supposed to do when Richard gets back?" he asked, his voice desperate. Clara said it was someone close. "Mike's always at our place. I showed him Richard's closet once as a joke. He could know where the money was." His friends protested, shocked. "Mike's your best friend. How can you accuse him? He was showing off a new phone, but it could be a gift from his parents." Steve insisted, gripping his phone tightly. "I don't believe in coincidences. Mike's always around, never misses a party, always asking about my life. It all points to him." As the sun set behind Manhattan's skyline, casting orange, glows through the apartment windows, Steve felt his world crumbling like a sandcastle under waves. Standing by the window, staring at the city lights, he sensed he was losing control of his life. Part 2. Conflicts with loved ones and new doubts. Steve couldn't bear the uncertainty gnawing at him, like the relentless rain drumming on Brooklyn's rooftops. His best friend Mike was the heart of their crew, tall, athletic, with neatly combed blonde hair and a charismatic smile that drew everyone in. Mike wore denim jackets, his dragon tattoo on his forearm adding a rebellious edge, and his knack for storytelling made him the center of every party. He and Steve had shared everything since their first year at NYU. Notes, late-night talks about their dreams, and endless laughter. But lately, Mike's complaints about being broke and subtle hints of envy towards Steve's cushy life, funded by his stepfather's wealth, felt ominous. Their friendship, once as warm as a summer evening in Central Park where they'd shared beers and big plans, was now poisoned by distrust. Steve felt he was losing not just the money but a part of himself. Convinced Mike was the thief, Steve decided to confront him face to face. He arranged to meet in Central Park, where autumn leaves rustled underfoot and a cold breeze swept clouds across the sky. The benches were damp from morning rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and distant hot dog stands. Steve stood by the lake, his heart pounding, as Mike approached, casual in his favorite denim jacket. "What kind of friend are you?" Steve began, his voice trembling with anger, his face flushed. "I know you stole the money from my apartment. Where'd you get that new phone you were bragging about at school?" Mike stopped, his eyes widening in shock. "My parents gave it to me for my birthday. I told you that," he said, his voice laced with hurt. "You're seriously accusing me? We've been friends since freshman year." Steve clenched his fists, his eyes blazing. "Give the money back? I'll never forgive you. You knew about the closet. You were there last." Mike shook his head, his face showing disappointment. "You're out of your mind, Steve. I didn't steal anything," he said, walking away, leaving Steve alone among the trees. The sting of betrayal pierced him like the park's chilly wind. Adding to his turmoil, Steve's girlfriend, Abigail, a fellow NYU student with long black hair cascading in waves, warm brown eyes, and a soft smile that always calmed him. Hadn't shown up to classes for 2 days and wasn't answering her phone. Abigail was a romantic soul. She wrote poetry, dreamed of traveling Europe, and loved long walks along the High Line, where she and Steve shared plans for the future. Their year-long relationship had been his anchor, but her silence now pressed on him like a storm cloud. He called her, pacing the apartment, where her scarf, scented with lavender and vanilla, lay on the couch. "Abby, where are you? Why aren't you at classes?" he asked when she finally picked up, his voice thick with worry. She replied weakly, as if exhausted. "I'm sick, running a fever. Turned off my phone to rest. Don't come over, you might catch it. I'll call when I'm better." Steve was stunned she hadn't told him sooner and decided to visit her anyway, grabbing a bouquet of daisies and medicine from a corner pharmacy. But, as always, he left a knife on the kitchen table blade up, a habit he dismissed as superstition. On his way to Abigail's place in Soho, where narrow streets buzzed with trendy boutiques and cafes, Steve felt unease. Passing a cozy coffee shop, its air rich with the aroma of espresso and croissants, he saw a scene that shattered him. Abigail sat at a table with Mike, laughing and holding hands. The cafe's warm ambience, soft lighting, quiet jazz, felt like a cruel contrast to his pain. "What the hell? You said you were sick, stuck in bed," Steve exclaimed, approaching, his voice shaking. Abigail looked up, her gaze turning cold. "It's my choice, Steve," she said sharply, brushing back her hair. "You're driving everyone crazy with your accusations, even your best friend. You blame me for not caring, but you've pushed everyone away over this money. I don't want to see you anymore. Find your money yourself." Steve stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. He turned and left, the city's noise drowning his thoughts. Heartbroken, Steve returned to Madame Clara in Yonkers, her house a rare refuge. The scent of herbs and candles soothed him as Clara, in her white linen blouse, sat at the table, as if expecting him. "Mike stole Abigail, and I'm sure he took the money," Steve complained, his shoulders slumped. Clara shook her head, her gray eyes piercing. "He didn't take it," she said calmly. "You accused your friend wrongly, and he retaliated out of hurt. Forget Abigail. Her heart's with someone else now. Don't search for the money. It'll only get worse. Leave your mother and stepfather. Start living on your own." Steve sighed, his eyes full of despair. "I've thought about it, but where would I go? My girlfriend's gone. My friend betrayed me. All because of this damn money," he said, clenching his fists. Clara touched his hand. "It's not about the money," she replied. "You ignore my advice, still leaving the knife blade up. So the conflicts won't stop." Steve sat in the quiet house, time dragging on, but with no job or place of his own. He felt trapped. Meanwhile, his father, James, arrived, a kind man in his 50s with graying temples and a warm gaze, dressed in a worn denim jacket smelling of motor oil from his job as a mechanic. James rarely saw Steve due to his divorce from Emily, but always supported his son. They sat in the kitchen over tea, the faint scent of Emily's pancakes lingering. "How's school, son?" James asked, smiling. Steve hid his anxiety. "It's fine. Mom and Richard are away on business. Makes things easier." James shared excitedly. "I'm planning to open my own auto shop. Got some money together, borrowed from an old friend." Steve tensed, recalling overheard talks. 100 grand went missing from the apartment. "I heard you asked Mom for a loan, and she said no. Did you take the money, Dad?" he asked, his voice shaky. James shook his head, his face serious. "I didn't steal anything, Steve. How could you think that?" Steve didn't fully believe him, and the meeting left him more confused. The night in Brooklyn was sleepless, the city lights outside his window cold and distant. Part 3. The truth revealed and a family reunited the next day. Emily and Richard returned from their business trip, bringing with them a suitcase of exhaustion and an air of tension. The Brooklyn apartment, with its minimalist decor and floor-to-ceiling windows, felt cold despite the smell of sizzling steak Emily prepared for dinner. Richard, as usual, talked business, his voice brimming with confidence, while Emily tried to keep the peace, smiling through her fatigue. Over dinner, Richard flipped through the Wall Street Journal and said, "While we were gone, competitor stocks tanked. We can invest the money from the Hamptons house sale wisely." Steve sat silently, his heart pounding at the thought of the missing money being discovered. His palms sweated, his eyes darting to the table where, as always, a knife lay blade up. 2 days later, as sunlight streamed through the skyscrapers, Emily, rummaging through the closet, asked, "Where's the money?" "I didn't move it." Richard turned on Steve, his face red with rage. "You stole 100 grand. Get out until you return every cent, you freeloader." Steve protested, standing up. "Maybe it was Dad? He comes by when you're not here. I saw him." Richard's voice thundered. "You knew and didn't say anything? You and your mother planned to rob me." Emily insisted she knew nothing, her eyes filling with tears, but the argument raged, filling the apartment with shouts like a storm in a small room. Feeling guilty, Steve returned to Madame Clara in Yonkers, seeking refuge. Her house, surrounded by a garden, smelled of herbs, and Clara, in her white linen blouse, sat at the table. "Richard's kicking me out, yelling at Mom. Thinks I stole," Steve said, his voice trembling. "How do I fix this?" Clara's eyes glinted as she replied, "The money will be found soon, and you'll learn the truth. I see a dark place, a car, and a blue bag with the cash." Steve's eyes widened. "That's Dad's garage. He's hiding the money." He grabbed the keys and headed to James's garage in the suburbs, where the air reeked of oil and dust. The garage was cluttered with tools, but James, seeing his son, said, "I didn't steal anything. Move in with me. There's enough space." Steve searched the garage, overturning crates, but found no money and realized he'd wrongly accused his father. Shame washed over him like a hot wave. Back home, Steve heard Emily crying in her room, the dim lamplight casting shadows. "Mom, I'm sorry I told Richard about Dad. Your fights are my fault," he said, sitting beside her. Emily sighed, wiping tears. "It's not you, Steve. I left James because he didn't earn enough, thinking Richard would bring stability. But Richard only cares about money, not feelings." Steve, his voice hopeful, suggested, "Let's move in with Dad. He's waiting for us. I saw how much he misses you." Emily smiled through her tears. "If that's what you want, I'm open to it. Maybe it's a chance to fix things." The next evening, as twilight painted New York in purple hues, Steve saw Richard loading a blue bag into the trunk of his car in the building's garage. "That's the bag Clara mentioned. You stole the money?" Steve asked, stepping closer. Richard sighed, his voice softer. "I hid it before the trip to keep it safe from your friends. I thought we'd be a real family, but you're irresponsible, always partying." Steve was stunned. Richard had hidden the money and blamed him. Emily, learning the truth, left Richard, her face etched with disappointment. She returned to James, who had loved her all along, waiting in his modest Yonkers home where the smell of fresh baking filled the air. The family reunited, and Steve and James opened an auto shop that began turning a profit through their hard work. Abigail stayed with Mike, and though they forgave Steve, their friendship didn't recover. During a final visit, Clara reminded him, "Never leave a knife blade up. It brings family quarrels." Standing on the threshold of a new life, Steve looked at New York's lights with hope, having learned the value of true relationships. Friends, that's the end of our mystical tale. Loved it? Hit like and subscribe to True Stories of Fate. Stay tuned for a new captivating story. Share your own mystical stories in the comments. We can't wait to read them. See you soon, and let fate surprise you.